Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of the House of Kanaz podcast. It's been a while since my last episode, and it's exactly what I predicted. I gave myself a tarot reading more than a month ago, probably now 5 or 6 weeks ago. And in that reading, I got a card that suggested that this period of the year was going to be one of a lot of work, which it has been. And I am not complaining because I feel like I am busy, I am getting stuff done, and I'm fulfilled in all of the ways that I've been looking for at the moment. So that's great. That's great. So let me tell you a little bit about what's been going on with me. So I'm continuing my studies of astrology. In the last episode, I believe I was taking a relationship astrology class, and that was really informative. I was reading multiple books, and the instructor, Maria De Simone, she gave us so many additional books to read. So I have now a stack of books in my library to read once I'm done with my courses as a kind of a second course for myself. And then currently I am in my third course with her, which is on just transits. And it's great because we are using this book that's called Predictive Astrology by Bernadette Brady. And this is a book that I first read, I want to say like 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm rereading it now for the course. And it is this, I had this feeling today, actually, as I was reading some of the examples of how much I can see, like how much more I understand of the technique. Because initially, when I read this, I did not have all of the significations for houses down and the techniques down. Like I could understand the mathematics behind it, but now I understand the symbology behind it. And so when I'm going through the examples, when I'm kind of predicting like how do I think, or how would I raise this relationship with the planets? And then I read it and it's very similar to how the author's approaching it. There is a bit of like, oh, I've come a long way. So that's great. And if you are studying astrology, I do recommend this book. This is a good book to have once, like as a secondary book, because this is all about predictive astrology. So it's good to have like a book that's focused on like natal analysis just as a foundation, and then to have this as like an additional book so that you can focus on interpreting transits and secondary progressions. So that's one of my studies at the moment. But then to go along with the tarot reading, I manifested another course. And this is a course on intuition and channeling. And this is something that I have been looking for years. And it kind of just fell on my lap. And how it fell on my lap is I think I mentioned this in a previous episode. I did a bit of research and I was trying to find a past life regressionist. I ended up finding one who lives in my area. And we initially met in June, July for just like a patient intake, client intake type of meeting about the goals of my past life regression, experience that I want to have and my goals just in general in life. Anyway, so she gave me a huge reading list, and I've been reading a lot about past life regressions. I probably have read so far like 6 or 7 of the books. And then I had my past life regression, which I will talk about, but I'm trying to think about the best way of saying this. She was like, "Oh, I'm also teaching courses on intuition and channeling." And because my past life regression experience went, really well for me, I figured, okay, like this is something that I will continue with her. So that's what's going on there. So essentially, Saturdays are my astrology class that I'm taking, and then Sundays is my intuition class. And it's going to be like that for the rest of the year. So I am really devoting myself this fall to this practice. This is like it is planned in my schedule. This is how I'm spending my time. And it's great for me. It is providing me with structure that I have been missing. I feel like, especially when the pandemic happened, I let myself go in regards to structure. And I was way more militant with my time before the pandemic. So much so that I would be at work normally for 12 hours. Or maybe I should say I would be out of my house for 12 hours. And I would work out for like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on how I felt before work, at work, though. So use the gym at work, then have 8 hours of work, and then walk back to my car and drive back. That would be at least 30 minutes, sometimes 45 or an hour if the weather's bad. And yeah, my life kind of changed dramatically once I was able to just work from home for the most part. Um, and I had more time essentially and became a little less rigid about how to do everything. So now I know how much I can handle because I handled it for years. And so I need that structure because with that structure, I can operate more effectively. Like that is something I, but I want structure that I want. Like I don't want people to impose structure, right? Like I have a Saturn opposing my ascendant. Like I am very particular about structure. So anyone that tries to control me quickly realizes that I ghost them. Like I will just be a little Pisces. I will, just float away and you won't even notice it because you're so in your head. Like you don't understand the energy pullback there. But that's neither here or there. But about my past life regression, because I don't think I talked about that in the last episode. Um, it was really intense. I and okay, so she gave me a file which was really helpful for me to get used to her phrasing and her cadence and her speech. And this was a file in which I developed a safe place. So essentially, like when I would close my eyes and go through this hypno trance, I would essentially like walk down a flight of stairs, envision a door, open the door, and be in the safe place. And then it was up to me, like what that space was. And so I crafted this space. So before our past life regression, it was probably about like 30 minutes or 40 minutes of like intake. And she wanted me to describe to her the how I designed this safe place so that when she took me under, she could paint this space. So I thought that was interesting. And yeah, I don't want to give too many details, but essentially, for me, this experience, like, okay, so the way that I was practicing was there's several differences to the actual regression. And what I mean by that is I was using like blindfolds to just make it completely dark because I can see much better with blindfolds on. Like I'm not distracted by lights and so forth. So like I can see through my third eye a lot better and I can visualize a lot better if I am completely dark. Um, so that was something that she was like, "Oh, I want to see your eye movement," which I understand. Like, I think it's important to see the rapid eye movement to be able to track where people are. So it did not have my blindfold. And then the other thing was I didn't train so much on my office chair. I was often like laying down, like on a couch or on my bed. So it was on my chair as well, which wasn't as comfortable as the other places. But it was still, with that all said, right? I was still able to get to a place where I was able to envision a past life. And I don't think it's necessary to go through the ins and outs, but what I will say is that I got to a scene, like essentially how it worked. It's like I'll give you some of the details. So like the thing is we envision our space, and then she essentially had me walk down a path and cross over a bridge, the bridge of time. And then I was in the new space, right? The whatever space my subconscious pulled up. And so it was like a little bits here and there of firing up. And I found myself in a village that was covered, like was primarily like of stone, like gray, white stone. But as I'm walking this village, like I'm noticing like I don't see anyone out. Like I noticed that there's like torches that are lit in this village, but it was kind of like entering a video game, but no one's around. And so, like I was having a hard time orienting myself. So anyway, in the space then, and this is something that's like quite typical in the books, is then was like, okay, let's go to the earliest memory that you have in that life. And so like I'm envisioning like, being in this family and, seeing siblings and then a mother, and we're living like in a one room house, essentially. She's asking me questions about my mom and dad in that life and so forth. And then we like slowly progress into that life of like, okay, like let's go to when you're 17, 18. Let's go, a few years later, like what's the next memory and so forth. So like that's how it progressed. Until she progressed me to this period where I saw I can, I saw this body of water and I'm on like a precipice, like I'm on a hill. I see this body of water. It's very serene. It's very beautiful. And I just start crying, like uncontrollable crying. And she just let me cry for a few minutes. Like she did not say a word. And I just cried. It was very intense. And then she was like, all right, like let's try to move on from this. And I'm like, there's nothing after this. And so then I had to like change my perspective. And I viewed my death, the death in that life, however you want to think about it, whether, whatever. And so I watched myself die, and I'm surrounded by family as I'm dying. I am like a man in his 50s, surrounded by children and, a wife. Um, and watch myself die of a heart attack on a hill as I'm looking at this view. Anyway, after my past life regression, every day for weeks, I would have, I would spontaneously cry. And it was very similar to like the grief that I felt when my mom died, of like, I would just be doing something and then randomly I would be crying, like uncontrollably. So, and I don't think that this is a bad thing. Like to me, I feel like the crying and the stuff that I have been going through on like some unconscious level has shifted me to a place that I feel much better in. So I think that in general, for me, this experience, what I was looking for was a shift, a release of tension, and it provided that for me. It also provided me, so okay, so I die in this life, and then another like 30 minutes of the experience is experiencing what is termed like the afterlife or between lives existence, right? Where you are just energy. And she takes me to this like healing temple. Uh, and then I end up having this conversation with the past life that I was. So his name is Charles. And so like I'm basically having a conversation with, you know, Charles, myself, this other side of me, this um that part of me in this scenario. I mean, it was just really wild. And it opened up, like I've never really considered or focused on channeling before, but essentially this whole experience afterwards, I had a lot of like body sensations that were going on. And at one point, like I don't know if I've mentioned this on my podcast, but like since my mom has died, um, my mediumship abilities have appeared out of nowhere. And she has communicated with me a lot through dreams, but I can sense when she is near as well. And this was not something that I was particularly attuned to before. Um, Anyway, so during this experience where I'm in the between lives realm, then the hypnotist was like, okay, is there anyone else there that wants to talk to you, right? So like the children of mine from that life, like one of them, comes forward. I can see his face really like, I don't know how to say this. It's kind of like it was just like a quick snap of features. Anyway, so he comes forward and, very briefly, but then my mom of this life is very persistent, right? So then I start having a conversation with her. And all throughout that conversation, my left ear is like um, beating so much. And it's buzzing right now. Then my computer starts making sounds, right? And she she often fucks with the lights. But this was really weird. Like it was a really weird instance where I was trying to stay within it, but I was noticing my computer was making weird like sounds like the fan was going on and it wasn't the computer that I was using for Zoom. I had my laptop and I had my desktop next to it. So the desktop I hadn't touched for hours and it starts making noises and stuff and so forth. So like I knew something was going on. And afterwards, the hypnotist was like, "Well, I think that you are a channeler, and you should study with me to become a channeler." And I was like, "Great! I mean, like, great! Like, this is not exactly how I thought this session would go, but this also has given me a direction to go into." So that's that's been what I have been dealing with here. And yeah, it's been so much. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. If you are into this type of let's say alternative therapy, I do think that past life regression, especially if you're dealing with grief or there's something you're trying to unlock within yourself. Like for instance, this is not past life connected. I mean, maybe it is. I don't know. I think it's more childhood trauma related, but this is just what's coming to my mind. It's like 4 years, like really since I was 6, 5, I had a nightmare where, and this was a recurring nightmare that I had multiple times a year, all the time up until the age of like 35, where I would be unable to vocalize, unable to scream. Like something would be chasing me and I could not scream. And I would wake myself up and get out of the dream because of like the anxiety, the panic that I would have in that dream. Um, and then I started, let's say, telling my truth to people that did me wrong and or just like refused to acknowledge their impact on me. Because I was taught to be, a little bit of a people pleaser in some ways. And that is not something that I don't think anyone really should be a people pleaser. But previous generations, I think, trained their children to be as such for survival. But there's a lot of damage and trauma that comes from that. Anyway, so I started like trying to have like real conversations with some people in my life and got some things off my chest and told the truth about some things. And then I lost my voice. And to me, I always viewed that as like I'm living out that nightmare, but I'm like exorcising it from my body because it has been now come in December. It will be 3 years since I went through that experience and I have not lost my voice. I used to lose my voice at least once a year. Okay, I lost my voice December 3 years ago for 3 months. Like I had a paralyzed vocal cord. I could barely speak 2 or 3 words per breath and I could not project. And after that experience, I had to go to vocal therapy and learn how to breathe and learn how to speak again. It was a whole thing. That's a whole side story. Um, yeah. So if you're looking, if you have something that's like some pattern or something that you're trying to release yourself from, or maybe something that you know that's lurking in your unconscious that you want to bring up, doing past life regression is a way to uncover that, right? I mean, it's a little bit like rolling the die, but with the right therapist, if you tell them like, oh, I'm trying to work on this thing or that thing, they will be able to help you with that, right? A lot of the books that I'm reading, people have used that technique for like weight loss and smoking and things like that. So there are these are alternative ways to address habits and our patterns. So I'll leave that with you. Okay. So I'm going to change the topic dramatically. And I want to talk about Sylvia Browne. And because I feel like Sylvia Browne is having a renaissance. And I started looking at her chart, and there's some things I want to talk about. And today I got this Sylvia Browne t-shirt in the mail, and I figured, okay, let's go for it. I'm going to share my screen and show you her chart. Okay. So here we have the chart of Sylvia Browne, and we can see she was born October 19th. So her birthday was just 3 days ago of this recording. 1936 in Kansas City, Missouri at 2 p.m. Okay, so she is an Aquarius rising, Aquarius at 4 degrees and 53 minutes. She's got her sun in Libra and her moon in Sagittarius. Okay. So, the first thing that I was thinking about when I looked at her chart, just like indicators of psychic ability and the water houses. So the fourth, eighth, and 12th are houses to consider. So looking at her eighth house, which is, associated with like death and the occult and so forth, she does have Mercury and her sun there. So I thought that was interesting, especially with having Mercury in the eighth house. It already is kind of um, hinting about like there might be that ability or that talent that could be developed. And then if you look at, let's see, Okay, so then her Mercury, okay, so this is a minor aspect, but her Mercury is at a quincunx of what we have here is Uranus. So I thought, okay, like that's interesting. Again, that's kind of Uranus is these kind of sudden um, impulses. And if you watch Sylvia Browne give a reading, right, sometimes it feels like the information is rather unexpected, like Uranus. So I think that is very characteristic of her. Now, if we go one step further, the moon can represent our unconscious. Um, you know, people sometimes, just talk about it's like emotions and so forth, but I think it can also represent uh, the subconscious. That is square for Neptune. So the moon is squared Neptune. That's also an indication of possible psychic ability there. So again, Neptune is about dissolving boundaries. And so this, again, having that connection of Neptune and the moon allows her to be a little bit more porous and to receive information from the outside there. Also, just to go back to what we were talking about with Mercury, the ruler of the eighth house is Mercury, right? So again, having that ruler of the eighth house in the eighth house, the quincunx Uranus, I think that's really impactful. I'm going to just realize that I'm not showing all of the possible aspects here. So let's look. Okay. Is there anything else I feel like saying? Pluto. Um, so Pluto is in the sixth house. Okay. And we have that Pluto is square her sun. So again, Pluto squaring the sun, there's something there that allows her, she has access to something very deep, but it's not something that comes well, I think later on in her life, it comes easy because she trained it. But I would imagine um in her earlier life, that aspect would have been something difficult. But I think later on in her life, she became more accepting of that nature, her nature there. Okay. I think that's what I want to say at this time. So again, Sylvia's in, I'm seeing a lot of Sylvia Browne on my social media at the moment. And I want them to know why. Why am I doing that? So I'm going to approach this using some predictive astrology techniques. And in particular, the fact that she is being so present, the way that I'm going to focus on that is focusing on what's happening around her ascendant or her first house, what's happening to her 10th house. So again, the first house is kind of your body, your being, your inception, your point of being. Whereas the 10th house is your like how society is seeing you. your position in society. I would also consider looking at the sixth house, which is work, and the work that she was known for. So, with that all being said, we got the first house of Aquarius here. So, the planets that we want to consider the ruling planets of Aquarius, Saturn, traditionally, and Uranus. Okay. Then we have the 10th house. So, we have Scorpio here. The ruling planets of Scorpio traditionally was Mars in the 7th and Pluto, which is in the 6th. And if we look just at the 6th house, we got Cancer. The ruling planet there is the moon. So again, we already made the link of like the moon being square Neptune. So that is influencing the sixth house ruler, essentially. So another way of saying that is the sixth house ruler is square Neptune. So day to day, she's having to deal with Neptunian issues, right? Like Neptunian life of the connection of everything. It's a very spiritual placement. So let's first look at transits. And if we consider the transits, this is the placement of all the planets right now, like as I'm filming. This is where they lay. So I think it's important when you are considering transits. It's really only when outer planets are hitting or making aspect to primarily your personal planets, but also could be to your outer planets as well, depending on where you are in your life. So, and also angles. Point being is the first thing that I noticed was how Pluto is essentially at her ascendant. So I think that is fascinating. And it has been, let me show you. It was a bit closer to her ascendant earlier this year. So like I think in April, May, it got pretty close, like a degree away. And now it is a few degrees away, but it's still like hovering around the ascendant. So like that's one indicator of like that's a major thing to be happening there. The other thing that I noticed is, to me, this is a little bit less impactful, but it is, I think, curious, is that the transiting North Node is conjunct her Saturn. And again, Saturn is the traditional ruler of her first house. So again, we already got now two kind of hits of what's happening to her first house. So I think that's, or her ascendant rather. So I think that's really interesting. And, nothing, I don't think anything, yeah, nothing's really happening to her Uranus. And you could say, like Pluto is at a semi-square with Saturn. Like if we're going to count minor aspects, you could also count that as well. So again, what that's saying is that the distance between Pluto and Saturn is 45 degrees. And that is a hard aspect. So typically when we're looking at this, it's hard aspects that will be those are the aspects that are associated with life changes. Okay. So that I think is it's really interesting. And then if we consider her secondary progressions, so secondary progressions again is when we basically use the formula that a year of your life is equal to a day or a day for a year, essentially. So what we see here is essentially, I think that she's almost what, 89. If she was alive today, she would be 89 years old. So the planets that we have in this blue wheel represent the position where they were on her 89th day of life. Okay. And when we consider the secondary progressions, we're only going to consider the faster moving planets. And we only want to look at things that have a tight orb. So the first thing that I noticed was that the secondary progressed moon was conjunct for Saturn. So again, we're getting another hit on that Saturn. So Saturn is something that is, ruling her first house. It's also ruling her 12th house. So her 12th house is the house of the unseen. It's also associated with psychic abilities and so forth. So that's interesting. If I look at the sun, her sun is her secondary progressed sun is square her natal sun. So again, a square is a 90-degree aspect. And every year, the sun moves, or every day, I should say, every day, approximately, the sun is moving 1 degree, which means from a secondary progression standpoint, every year the sun is moving 1 degree. Roughly. It's not always 1 degree. It's roughly 1 degree. So by the time that she's 90 years away from her date of birth, then the suns would be 90 degrees apart, essentially, is what this is saying. So that shouldn't be that surprising. But again, it warrants, I think it's really intriguing there that's something that's popping up here where light is being cast on her being from a different angle, right? She has passed. However, we are looking at her light from a different side. And I think a whole new generation is finding out about her that, they probably did not grow up with her. And perhaps they are falling in love with her. The other thing I will say is that the moon is opposite her, the secondary progressed moon is opposite her Neptune. So again, Neptune is a sign that is associated with psychic abilities. It's associated with boundaries. So again, psychic intuition and being able to communicate with the dead is something about relaxing your boundaries, right? Like there's a definite linkage there. So again, she has in her chart this connection of the moon and Neptune, that they are square. And now using secondary progressions, we're getting this opposition. So that's like a key thing. So for me, I think that that's speaking really clearly. And again, that moon is something that is affecting her day-to-day life here. Trying to think if there's anything else that I want to say here. The moon also moves the quickest in regards to secondary progression. So let me just show you. If we go back 1 year, so the moon currently, her secondary progressed moon is at 17 degrees of Pisces. If we went a year ago, it would have been at 3 degrees Pisces. What that means is earlier this year, she also had her secondary progressed moon square her natal moon and opposing her Mars. So again, we're getting a lot of these hits to her sixth house, and that Mars is associated with her 10th house, as well as her third house, because Mars rules Aries, and third house is all about communications. So I think that that's really fascinating. I think the last thing that I looked at were her solar arc directions. And here I was noting, again, we're having the solar arc moon is square her natal moon. It is opposite her Mars. Her solar arc sun, again, the same thing as the secondary progressed sun is square her sun. And what I thought was really interesting, if you're watching this video, is that she has this diagonal of squares that are almost perfect. And again, that happens because when we're looking at a solar arc direction mathematically, we're taking the distance that the sun has traveled. Well, the sun has basically traveled 90 degrees because we are almost 90 years away from her date of birth. And so if you push everything 90 degrees, well, everything's going to be squared to its natal position. So again, this is kind of lighting things up. And I guess everyone would experience that around the age of 90. But I think that this is really interesting. I think that, these examples that are just laid out really highlight how her first and her 10th, you could also say her sixth and her third, are being hit in the rulers of those houses are being hit in a way. And that's why we're seeing a lot of Sylvia Browne at the moment. But I think one point that I want to make that I think is important is that just because we die doesn't mean our birth chart becomes inactive, right? This yet again is showing that we can use that chart essentially indefinitely, because that chart is representing the essence of you. And even when you leave the physical body, that essence still exists. And it comes in waves, right? We see this with people who have passed, celebrities that have passed, right? We won't think about Princess Diana for years. And then she's back in the mainstream, right? So I think it's interesting to then consider the astrology of what's happening on her chart because it's often reflective of that. As you can see with Sylvia Browne, it is very clear that her chart this year, it is planets are hitting her chart in such a special way that is correlates with what we see happening on social media with her. All right, so let's wrap this up and do a little reading as I often end these shows, or I should say always end these shows with a little reading. And we're still, yeah, we're still in the new moon era at the moment. Let me just show you really briefly before I jump into the reading, because I did not show you the astrology of right now. So this is the position of everything at the moment. And did it just happen? Hold on. This is did not realize it was today. Okay, so yeah, okay. All right. I'm gonna just leave that in. So today at around 6:30 a.m. Eastern time, Neptune entered Pisces again. So Neptune's been retrograde and it's doing this little dance where it's been in Aries for a few months. It just moved in today as I'm filming this into Pisces. When I was looking at the transits, I was like, I didn't think that was today, but it was today. It was today. So we now have Neptune in Pisces. It will be in Pisces for a few months. And then it will leave Pisces for more than 150 years. So this is the last little bit, and it's going to hang around at 29 degrees. So things might be a little bit intense in that neck of the woods. That's for a future podcast. What you can see already, maybe I can make this a little bit clearer. There's a lot of like grand trines that are happening at the moment. And I want to just highlight what we can see here. And I think we will, this is going to be even more clear like later on in the evening. So hold on. Okay, yeah. So as I'm filming this, there's a lot of things that are changing. So I'm kind of like catching my breath here. So today, Neptune went back into Pisces. Tomorrow, the sun moves into Scorpio. But you can see this lovely triangle that is happening here. And that triangle is this grand trine at the moment. And this is like a wide grand trine, but it's a grand trine nonetheless of Jupiter with Mars and Mercury conjunct in Scorpio, and then also trining Saturn and Neptune. So we got this lovely kind of water trine energy that's going on at the moment, just to give you something to think about. But this is a time, as you can see, there's a lot of things that are changing, and Uranus is the last outer planet that's going to go backwards to Taurus, and that doesn't happen until November. So we still got a few weeks left until that happens. But once that does, it's like we are at the same position as we were at the beginning of the year, right? So what we just went through, really from the spring of 2025 to mid-November of 2025, is a little bit of a warm up. So November to, let's say, the end of January, February, that it's a little, it's a return to like something that we were before. What I'm trying to say is after, like, let me just, it's like in February where shit gets real. Um, when is it? So February, like 21st, February 20th, 21st. That's when shit really gets real. And that's when this conjunction of Neptune and Saturn happen. And it's happening at 0 degrees Aries. And this to me is something I have been studying for like really since I started studying astrology. I have been focusing on this because to me, this warrants a big change. Like I think that this is like a harbinger of something massive happening. And this is something that happens like every, was it like 37 years or so? So the last time that this happened is when the Berlin Wall came down. And it often is associated with great change in Russia, but it does suggest a dissolving of boundaries, a dissolving of structures, and a giant, to me, I always think about a giant reset button. The fact that it's at 0 degrees, it's at 0 degrees, the first degrees of the zodiac. To me, that suggests something massive is coming. I think I think things are going to be leading up to that in the winter. I think that we can see the writing on the wall, but I don't think things really get fiery until next year. That's my prediction anyway. All right. So that there's enough of that. Um let's do a tarot poll. And again, as I'm filming this, we are in the new moon, Libra new moon. The sun is still in Libra. Uh, and I just want to pull some cards to see what advice or what guidance we have. What things do we need to consider going forward? And I've also been using lately. This oracle deck called the Green Glyphs Oracle. I like to alternate the cards that I use, and I really like the art for this deck, so I want to utilize that. All right, let's see what story, what advice we have here. Okay, so the first card is the Prince of Swords. So again, swords, it's about our mental capacity. And when I look at this card, I always think about these smaller figures as like different lines of thoughts or different pathways you could go, or different, you could just think about them as different like thought patterns. And this larger guy is kind of reeling them in. So I always think about this card as trying to or learning how to like control your thoughts or like being more disciplined about what's going on in your head, being conscious of the patterns of maybe the way that you speak to yourself and things like that. I mean, maybe there's going to just be like shit going on in the world and you have a lot of anxiety towards that and you're going to need to learn how to like not let that destroy you, just to be real. um that could be it. Okay, trying to make it so that you can see the cards. Second card, interesting. We have another prince. We have the Prince of Dis here. So this is a very earthly card. He is, I want to say that he's naked. What do you think? I think that he's naked. So to me, in some ways, that means that he's not like hiding anything. Like he's being like honest. Like there's something earnest and honest about that. Also with the bowl, like I feel like the bowl is very much like I'm gonna trudge forward. Like I'm just gonna, you know, get through it. So there's something here about like understanding your values, like your value system, like understanding who you are and using that as like your guiding force going forward. We have the Five of Dis, which is called the Worry card. So this connects with the first card that I pulled of like, don't have an anxiety attack. This makes me feel that there is going to be something that happens in the world or something that will cause us worry. There's things happening. I mean, like, let's be honest. We're all, there's so many thoughts about the AI bubble bursting, right? Or the fact that it does seem maybe things are imminent. Okay. Trying not to be like a bearer of bad news here. The Oracle card that I got is the Mantle. Now, I don't have I don't use these decks all that often. And so I'm gonna first reflect on like what could mantle represent? Well, when I think about this card, like I'm putting something on my mantle that commemorates something or a piece of art. It's something that beautifies, it's something that's simple, maybe that beautifies um, a place. I think a mantle is also something that's sturdy, that can handle some weight. Okay, let's see what the book suggests. And this is how you learn different decks, is that you play with them, you ask questions, you get the cards and you think about it, and then you see, okay, what does the author of the deck, how do they view it? Okay, so he writes a little paragraph about the mantle, which I'm going to read to you. It says, we often forget about the things we leave on the shelf. We do. I do. That's why I have shelves all around my house because I leave a lot of things on shelves. They they fall into place, blending into the background. Now that dust, sorry, the text is so small. Now that dust is settling, is there something you shelved that is worth remembering? So this card is asking us to think back, to address old feelings, to revisit something that's on the shelf. Maybe we put a memory, maybe we put a bad thing on the shelf. Now we have to revisit it. We have to connect with it, right? We have to do that work. So that's what this card is about. It's about, there are times in our life where maybe things are a little bit too much and we deal with whatever we can at that moment. And then we put it off to the side because life happens. And then we have to go back to it. Now, I don't think that, I think it's important to think about what it is that you want to go back to, because if it's the thing that's going to cause you a lot of worry, yeah, you have to ask yourself, like, what is this thing, right? What is it that you are revisiting? Why are you revisiting this, right? It may be the solution to your worry, right? Maybe you have gone through some period of high anxiety in the past, and you're revisiting something in the past that's like parallel to your current like anxiety, and you can then overcome your current anxiety in a significant way, right? Like that could be one trajectory. Another trajectory is thinking about the thing that you put on the mantle causes you a lot of worry, but also forces you to really reconcile with your thought patterns and your values, to be more clear on your directionality. So at the end of the day, these cards are suggesting that, there's a bit of reflection that's going on, right? It's not really great to stay in a state of worry, right? Like that's not going to do anything for you. Because if you are staying in a state of worry, your mind is going to go very untrained. You're going to spiral out of control. And that's not going to be great. But I do think like I have spent a good portion of this year, I would say a good 6 months of this year, revisiting different parts of my life. And I do think that that's a good exercise to re-examine certain things. Realize that you're at a different point now. Like those things um, should not and do not actually have influence and control over you. So sometimes it's good to recognize that you have evolved, things are different, and yeah. So I leave that as a task of asking yourself, and maybe something just pops up that you need to revisit. Maybe it's you know, the thing that just popped in my head is like we're revisiting our country's constitution and we're worried about people taking advantage of the faults in our system due to just thinking that people are going to be respectful naturally and not um, be so unlawful at times. And yeah, that that's where I'm ending this. Okay, yeah, let's end it there. So another way to think about these cards is that when you are in a state of worry, to really inspect that, like what's causing that worry. So one way to interpret these cards is to think about if you are in this state of worry, you have to do some work in training your mind to getting control over how much is that worry just you spiraling? Like how much of that is really necessary, right? Like worrying is not going to solve any problem. Let's be honest here. So it's about you reeling that worrying in and you standing by your values and your convictions. And maybe something is not, maybe you have something nice on your shelf, right? Like this vase that we have in this picture here. Maybe you put something nice on a shelf that you haven't really looked at for a bit. And maybe that also helps you out of this sense of worry. Maybe it evokes a nice memory, maybe something pleasant. Anyway, that is your reading for the month. And if you have survived to the end of this podcast, I congratulate you. And I would really appreciate it if you follow me on the socials. You can find me on Instagram and on TikTok and YouTube under the House of Kanaz. And until next time, until next month, I hope you all take care. And if you happen to resonate with this reading, leave a comment. Let me know how these aspects, these different archetypes are playing in your life. Okay, see you.